Everything appears normal. Are you absolutely sure?
The woman sitting in that consultation room, the woman who just shook Serena's hand, had spent 8 years trying to destroy her marriage. She had succeeded. The marriage was gone. The house was gone. The man Serena had loved was gone. And now, 3 years later, that same woman needed Serena to save her life. And here is the part that will stay with you. Serena said yes, not because she had to, because of who she was, who she had always been, who Margaret had spent 8 years trying to convince her son that Serena was not. This is that story, and it starts on a Friday evening 8 years ago. Serena walked into a fundraising event and noticed a man in the corner who was listening to someone speak, not nodding along, not waiting for his turn, actually listening, eyes on the person, body turned toward them, the full presence of someone who genuinely cared about what they were hearing. She watched him for a few minutes before she approached. When she did, he turned that same attention to her, and she thought, this is the person I have been looking for. His name was Kenneth James. He was a secondary school teacher. He coached the school debate team. He called his mother every Sunday without fail. That last detail, she would think about that detail many times over the next 8 years. Serena was a specialist physician. She had completed her degree at 26, her specialist training at 30. By 32, she was one of the most respected practitioners in her field in the city. She had built every single piece of that herself. With a mother who worked 2 jobs and a father who told her excellence was not optional, it was the minimum. She was not arrogant about what she had become. She was simply clear about it. She knew exactly who she was. 3 months into their relationship, Kenneth said, I need you to meet my mother. Serena said, I would love to. She meant it. She arrived at Margaret's house with flowers. She was warm. She was present. She asked questions. She genuinely tried. Margaret looked at her, smiled the right number of times, answered questions with the minimum required information, and said one thing, just one, as Serena was leaving. She said, Kenneth is very particular about what he needs. She said it to Serena, but she was looking at Kenneth. In the car, Kenneth said, she liked you, Serena said. Did she? Not a question. Kenneth did not notice the difference. At the first family Christmas, 4 months later, Margaret gave everyone gifts. Kenneth's siblings got thoughtful, personal things. Kenneth got a handmade photo album. Serena got a book, a self-help book, Finding Balance as a Working Woman, wrapped in expensive paper, with a card that said, Wishing you peace in the new year. Serena unwrapped it, read the title, looked up. Margaret was watching her, smiling. Serena smiled back, said, Thank you, Margaret. This looks interesting. Later in the car, Kenneth said, Mum really made an effort. Serena said, she did. She put the book in the back seat. She never opened it. She never forgot it either. By the time Kenneth proposed, on a Tuesday evening, kitchen floor, no staging, completely himself, Serena had already catalogued 18 months of small moments exactly like the Christmas gift. None of them were dramatic enough to name directly. All of them were consistent enough to form a picture. She said yes to Kenneth, with everything she had. She just knew the picture she was walking into. The wedding was beautiful. Truly the flowers, the food, the people who loved them both. Margaret wore a dress that was cream, not white, cream, just close enough to notice, just far enough to deny. Her wedding speech was 4 minutes long. She talked about Kenneth for 3 minutes and 50 seconds. She said Serena's name twice, once in the middle, once at the end. We are so glad Kenneth found someone. Not, we are so glad he found you, Serena. Someone. Serena stood at the head table in her wedding dress and smiled through every second of that speech. Diane, her best friend, sitting at table 4, caught Serena's eye during the second minute. Serena gave her the smallest shake of her head. Not now. Later. The marriage started well enough. Kenneth was attentive, present, everything he had been during the relationship. The erosion began small, the way all serious erosion does. 6 months in, Margaret started visiting unannounced. Not occasionally. Every week. She had a key Kenneth had given her before the wedding. A key he had never asked for back. A key Serena had never asked him to reclaim. She had told herself it would resolve naturally. It did not resolve naturally. Margaret came in while they were at work, left food in the refrigerator, rearranged the kitchen cupboards once, left a note on the counter, put the pots on the lower shelf, easier to reach. Serena stood in her own kitchen and read that note. She stood there for a full minute. Then she picked up her phone, called Kenneth. She said, "Can you call your mother and ask her not to rearrange our kitchen?" Kenneth said, "She was just trying to help." Serena said, "I know. Please ask her not to." 3 days later, the pots were back on the lower shelf. Kenneth said, "She just worries about us." He said it like it explained something. It did not explain anything. At a family lunch in year 2, Margaret asked Kenneth about a woman from his past. Her name was Tracy. She had dated Kenneth briefly for 3 months 5 years earlier. Margaret said, "Whatever happened to Tracy? She was so easy to have around, in front of Serena, at a family table." With warmth in her voice she had never once directed at Serena. Serena picked up her glass, took a sip, set it down, said nothing. Kenneth said, "Mum." Margaret said, "What? I was just asking." That evening, Serena said to Kenneth, "Your mother mentioned Tracy today." Kenneth said, "She does not mean anything by it." Serena said, "I know exactly what she means by it, Kenneth," he said. "You are reading too much into things." She looked at him, said nothing, filed it. Year 3, Margaret began making comments about children. Not directly, never directly. She said things like, "I saw the Hendersons. Their grandchildren are growing so fast." She said things like, "Some women focus so much on their career they forget about the important things." She said it at tables full of people, with a smile, with warmth in her voice, directed at Serena. Kenneth never said, "Mum, stop," not once. In year 4, Serena sat Kenneth down. She said, "I need you to hear something," he said. "Okay," she said. "Your mother has been managing our marriage since the day we got back from our honeymoon," she said. "The key, the kitchen, the Christmas gift, the Tracy comment, the children comments." She said, "I have catalogued all of it, and I need you to see it as a pattern rather than individual moments." Kenneth listened to everything. He said, "I hear you." He said, "I will talk to her." He talked to her. Margaret cried on the phone, said she was only trying to help, said she did not realize, said she would do better. She did better. For about 3 weeks. Then the kitchen was rearranged again. This time she moved the spice rack. In year 5, Serena stopped having the conversations. Not because she gave up. Because she had understood something she had been refusing to accept. Kenneth would never fully choose her. Not because he did not love her. Because he had never been required to choose anything in his life. His mother had always been the atmosphere he breathed. The water he swam in. He did not know how to exist outside of it. He did not know that choosing his wife over his mother was even something a man was supposed to do. She stayed for 3 more years, not because she was weak, because she had made a commitment, because she still loved him, because she kept hoping. The moment that ended it was not dramatic. It never is. The real endings are never dramatic. They are just the last ordinary moment before everything becomes something else. It was Kenneth's birthday. November. Serena had been planning it for 2 months. A reservation at the restaurant he had mentioned 3 times. A weekend away. She had booked it 6 weeks in advance. On the Thursday before his birthday, Kenneth said, "My mum has organized a family lunch for Saturday." Serena looked at him. She said, "I have already made plans for Saturday." "For your birthday," Kenneth said. "I know, but she organized this for me," he said. "I cannot cancel on her." Serena sat very still. Then she said, "You can always cancel on me, though." Kenneth said, "That is not fair." And Serena said, "No, it is not." She stood up, picked up her keys, said, "I will be at Diane's." She walked out. She did not come back that night, or the next, or the one after that. When she came back 3 days later, it was to pack. Kenneth stood in the bedroom doorway. He said, "This is not what I want." His voice broke slightly. Serena folded a blouse. She said, "I know it is not," she said, "but it is what you chose." Over and over, for 8 years, he said, "Serena, my mother." She stopped folding. She looked at him. She said, "This is not about your mother anymore, Kenneth. This is about you. You always had a choice. You made it every single time. You just never noticed you were making it." She zipped the bag, picked it up, walked past him. He followed her to the front door, said her name. She turned around once. She said, "I hope you find your way to yourself. I genuinely mean that." Then she got in her car, and she drove. She cried for 45 minutes on the highway. The specific crying of someone releasing something they held for a very long time. Then she stopped, wiped her face, turned on the radio, and drove. Right now, drop a comment and tell us where in the world you are watching from. And if you have not subscribed to Turning Point Tales yet, hit that subscribe button. Stay with me. The most powerful part of this story is still coming. and you need to see what happens next. The divorce took 7 months. Kenneth did not fight it. In one of their mediation sessions, he said, "I know I let you down. I know what I should have done." Serena said, "I believe you," she said, "but knowing it now does not give back the 8 years." He had nothing to say to that. Neither did she. The house was sold. The assets split cleanly. She had always been organized. She moved into a flat 3 miles from the hospital. High floor, good light. She bought 6 plants. She cooked meals she had forgotten she loved because Kenneth had never liked them. She slept deeply for the first time in years. That sleeping, the deep, uncomplicated sleep of a woman who was no longer walking into her own kitchen, wondering what had been moved. It told her more about the last 8 years than any argument ever had. Diane came over every Friday, brought food, stayed late, talked about nothing important. The gift of a friend who knows you do not always need to process. Sometimes you just need company. Serena worked. She had always worked, but now she worked without weight. Her colleagues noticed. One of them told her she seemed lighter. She said, "I am." 3 years passed. Her reputation grew. She led a specialist unit. She published research that was cited internationally. She spoke at a national conference and was given a standing ovation. She did not think about Kenneth. She did not think about Margaret. She was simply living a life that was entirely her own, for the first time, in a very long time. Then on a Tuesday morning in March, she opened a new patient referral with her coffee. She read the name, and she set the coffee down. Margaret James. She read the diagnosis. She read the history. She sat completely still for a long moment. Then she called Dr. Okafor. She said, "I have a conflict of interest on a new referral. Can you take it?" Dr. Okafor reviewed the file. Called back 20 minutes later. He said, "Serena," he said, "I have looked at this carefully." He said, "There is no one else in this city." He said, "I can assist, but this case has to be you. I am sorry." Serena looked at the file. She thought about a cream dress at a wedding, a self-help book wrapped in expensive paper, a kitchen rearranged, a name mentioned once in a 4-minute speech, a man standing in a doorway watching her pack. She thought about all of it. Then she picked up her pen, wrote, accepted, closed the file, and opened the next one. The consultation was on a Thursday morning. Margaret arrived with Kenneth. Of course. Serena walked into the waiting room. Both of them stood up. Kenneth said her name. His voice was the voice of a man who had rehearsed being in this moment and was still not ready for it. Serena said, "Mr. James, Mrs. James, please come through. Professional, complete." In the consultation room, Serena looked at Kenneth, said, gently but clearly, "This consultation is between me and my patient." He looked at his mother. Margaret nodded once. He stepped out. Serena sat across from Margaret. She opened the file. For 45 minutes, she was the most thorough physician Margaret had ever encountered. Every detail explained. Every option laid out. Every question answered before it was asked. Not less than she gave any patient. Not more. Exactly what every person who sat in that chair received. At the end, Serena asked, "Do you have any questions?" Margaret had one. She said, "Why are you doing this?" She said it quietly, not aggressively, like someone who genuinely needed to understand. Serena looked at her. She said, "Because it is my job, because you need the best care available, and I am able to provide it." She said, "What happened between our families does not come into this room. It has no place here." Margaret looked at her for a long time. Then she said something. She said, "I need to tell you something. Before we go further, I need to say it." Serena waited. Margaret said, "I was unkind to you. For 8 years I was deliberate about it. I told myself I had reasons, my son, my concern for him, the life I had imagined for him." She stopped, looked at her hands. She said, "The truth is, I was threatened by you. You walked in and you were everything. Accomplished, certain, beautiful, and you did not need my son the way I needed him to be needed. I could not stand that," she said. "I spent 8 years removing you from a marriage that was not mine to interfere with, and I succeeded. And then my son became the quietest version of himself I have ever seen, and I understood, too late, what I had actually done." Her voice did not break. She had not come here to perform grief. She had come to say the truth. She said, "I am not asking you to forgive me. I do not have that right. I just needed you to know that I know what I did. I know the cost of it, and I am sorry." The room was very quiet. Serena looked at her. She thought about every Sunday night she had laid awake, every rearranged cupboard, every comment wrapped in a smile, every moment she had held herself together, in a room that was supposed to be her home. She thought about packing a bag while her husband watched from a doorway. She thought about 45 minutes of crying on a highway. She looked at Margaret, and she said, "Mrs. James, I treated you today the same way I treat every patient who sits in that chair. Not because of anything you just said, because of who I am." She paused. Then she said, "The hardest thing about being treated as less than you are is learning not to become less than you are. I never became less than I was. Not in your house, not in that marriage, not in this room today. That is not something you gave me. That is something I held on to in spite of everything." She picked up the folder, closed it, stood. She said, "I hear your apology. I receive it," she said. "Now let me do my job." She extended a hand. Margaret stood up. She was crying now, silently. She took Serena's hand, held it a moment longer than a handshake requires. Serena let her, then she walked out, went directly to her office, sat down, looked at her desk. She sat there for 4 minutes, then she got back to work. The treatment lasted 4 months. Serena led every step. Her team was precise, thorough, excellent. Margaret recovered completely. At the final appointment, Margaret came alone. She sat down across from Serena. She said, "Other specialists I consulted before this, before you, told me that in most hospitals this case would have been managed very differently, that the outcome would most likely have been different." Serena said, "I am glad it went this way." Margaret said, "I know why you did it, not for me." She looked at Serena directly. She said, "You did it because you are the kind of person who cannot do anything less than their best, even for the person who least deserved it." She said, "I spent 8 years trying to convince my son you were not enough." She paused. Then she said, "You were the most extraordinary person in that house, and I made sure he could not see it. That is something I will carry." Serena looked at her. She said, "Mrs. James," she said, "a long time ago someone told me, the greatest revenge is not making someone suffer. It is making them watch you flourish." She said, "I did not set out to do that. I just kept going." She said, "Go home, rest, take care of yourself. You are well now. That is the only thing I need from this." Margaret nodded. She stood. She walked to the door. Then she stopped. She said, "For what it is worth, my son knows. He has always known. He was just not brave enough." Serena said, "I know. That was always the real problem." Margaret walked out. Kenneth called 2 weeks later. He said, "My mother told me what happened. She told me what she said to you. She told me what you said back." He was quiet for a moment. He said, "I do not have words for you, Serena." She said, "You do not need words, Kenneth." He said, "I am sorry for everything. For every time I chose the easier thing. I know it does not fix anything." She said, "No, it does not." She said, "But you said it. That counts for something." She put the phone down, made herself tea, stood at the window. The city below was just beginning to light up for the evening. She thought about a man in a corner of a fundraising event who was actually listening. She thought about wanting that. She thought about what it cost her to find out it was not exactly what she thought it was. She thought about 8 years, and she thought about this. The woman who walked out of that marriage was the same woman who walked into that consultation room. The same hands, the same mind, the same refusal to become less. Nobody had taken that from her. Not a difficult mother-in-law. Not a husband who kept choosing wrong. Not 8 years of being made to feel invisible in her own home. She had kept herself. And that, in the end, was the only victory that ever mattered. She put down her cup. She had rounds in the morning. New patients, new files, new problems that needed her. She went to bed. She slept well. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video and subscribe to Turning Point Tales. We will see you in the next one.